Put a finger down if you've ever been in a game of EDH where you built up this fantastic board. You have your artifacts out as mana rocks, providing you a lot of passive value. Your enchantments are out giving your board like a massive advantage, whether it be just some ETBs or some lord effects to buff everything up. And then your creatures themselves, your board is actually threatening, it's menacing, it's large, it's creating tokens for yourself. It has some soft levels of protection, but good ways to interact against single target removal. And you are looking for lethal. You're looking around at the Dimir opponent and they are all but tapped out. They have no more interaction. And then you're looking around at the Gruul player, all aggroed out and just been ramping the entire game. And you need to go through one more player, have them pass the turn, and then you go to your turn, untap and swing in for the lethal. And the game that's been going on for like 2 hours now. And you look to that player, they untap, draw, and all of a sudden your worst nightmare occurs. They start counting up their mana to 4, to 5, unfortunately to 6, and then they tap out casting Farewell, resetting the board that you've been building for so long and just really getting you to question why you're even friends with these people, why you're even playing this game, and if Magic is even worth it as a game for you to enjoy. Maybe you should make your life even worse and go become a League of Legends pro player. I'm personally a Dota guy myself, but I've heard any MOBA can be miserable at any point, equal to that of a long Commander game. And I think when it comes to resetting the board and clearing the way, board wipes are very nuanced in Commander. It can be very important to understand as a player when you should cast a board wipe. Should you cast a board wipe? Should you let the game end? Should you continue? Do you have a win condition after you cast it, or let your opponent resolve one? All of these questions are so important. And I think looking to those and also finding alternatives in terms of interaction are very key. If you've seen my previous Commander videos, I'm a big proponent of interaction and having that type of removal. Having those alternatives are also key to creating variety in your games and opening up new avenues and new moments in your gathering. And that's what I want to do today. Look at those moments, look at those options through a video by the Distraction Makers, and look at their alternatives for board wipes and how we might actually be able to implement some new play patterns to solve the problems in our Commander games. The problem with board wipes in Commander and what might be better. Gotta leave a like on the video here. Let's bring it up. Gavin, what do you got to say?
So if you're playing things like Farewell or Wrath of God or, Day of Judgment, these things that destroy all the creatures, you're actually hurting yourself.
I don't want to be that guy, but Farewell exiles everything. Just someone in the comments is going to hate me for that, but whatever.
Because you were destroying some of your resources, which are your opponent's creatures.
Distraction Makers.
We've talked a lot about the play patterns that emerge in Commander. We've talked a lot about the bystander effect, where you are advantaged by having your opponents fight against each other and you staying out of it. We've talked about you interacting with another player is actually hurting both you and them. Right. So
when it comes to that first statement about how, the bystander effect, letting people do what they need, one thing I want to have Commander players like really implement, especially at your casual tables, is the turn order. A lot of times player 1 will cast a spell that really affects player 4, and player 4 might have a vendetta against them. They might have a gut reaction. They're like, I need to interact. But player 4 doesn't understand that, before they cast that spell, maybe it affects player 2 just as equally. Maybe it affects player 3 a little bit as well. Let them interact. A lot of times at casual tables, that turn order is not followed. It just happens to be whoever has the loudest reaction first. And so just you look at everyone like, hey, do you have an answer to that? Hey, this is a bit of a problem. Like, do you have anything for it? And then you kind of go, they say, no, then you interact. That way it gives you a bit of it gives you a bit of information as to what's going on in the table. Now, of course, they could be lying to you, and that becomes a great intersectionality of like politics and who's playing who. But I feel like at that point, the group dynamic has reached such a cool point where like you can have that type of dynamic. But in casual tables, that doesn't happen. Let the turn order happen, and you can actually force other people maybe to interact first, saving your interaction spells for something in the future. So keep that in mind in casual tables. If you wanted to change things up and maybe you find you're the one interacting the most, you're dealing with everyone, first and everything, implement that turn order. Every time someone casts a spell, look at everyone and be like, all right, you're first. Do you have an answer? You're second. Do you have an answer? Okay, now me, I don't have an answer. Guess we're screwed. Something like that. But yeah.
To thinking about, all right, well, what are some types of cards that operate within those axes, right? How do I win the game by doing the least possible? So right. I thought we should talk a little bit about how fogs might secretly be the best cards in Commander, combat focused Commander. To be clear.
I think that's very clear
distinction.
Yeah, they don't do much when somebody's playing a Thassa's Oracle.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, it's funny because we talked about, like,
to be fair, board wipes don't really do them that much either, right? Like, there's a reason Thassa's Oracle is so good. You know, you kill that thing in response to the trigger, that trigger's still going off. So,
like, generally, what is the system of Commander at its most extreme? It's CEDH, and CEDH is primarily some sort of a hand combo that you are trying to protect, play out, use counter spells to protect your combo so that you go off and you win the game and no one else did anything. It's not often that you have a large board with lots of things on it. Sometimes that happens, but it's not very common.
right.
And so, yeah, if you're saying I prevent all damage dealt and someone says, too bad I win the game, then it doesn't make a huge impact.
I think a lot of people forget that, like, especially at the higher end, like, it's not okay. Losing to commander damage can be rare. It happens, I think, a lot more as, like, EDH has become more of the forefront and the most played archetype, and people have become to, like, innovate. I think, you know, losing to commander damage has become more common because people want to do that. Because it's become uncommon, it's kind of hipster to do so. So it's like, it's going to go up and down in waves, right? But at the end of the day, combat is always important, right? Like, getting people to a certain number is always going to be important, right? Like, you may not be taking them to 0, but taking them from 40 to 20, 40 to 15, 40 to even 30 is so big. It introduces new breakpoints. People start doing math. They're like, hey, I can deal 10 damage on my turn. That leaves 20 left after they dealt 10 damage. Then this player might be able to reduce it down to this, and it introduces new numbers. So it's always important to understand that it may feel like combat is not important, but this type of incremental damage that's not about commander damage is always relevant. Always, like, I feel like people that play at higher power tables always kind of forget this. It feels like things happen so quick sometimes that value is overwhelming that they forget that, yes, the incremental damage that, like, oh, I'm going to swing in here, whatever, it may or may not make me an enemy, like that 2 damage, that 1 damage, like that does matter. It does kind of poke someone down and it adds up over time.
Right. We'll get to the card that does see play.
Sure.
Later.
Right. For now, though, yeah, I think I was looking at various fog decks before we were recording this, and I personally really want to make a fog deck now for Commander.
It's going to be awful.
I think it's going to be really fun. I'm going to have a great time.
Well, there is like an archetype that already exists that sort of works this way called Pillow Fort, which basically is like you're trying to play a bunch of enchantments and things that deter your opponents from attacking you.
Right.
But
that's not really...
It's not... right. The biggest issue, I think, is that you're giving information by playing a permanence to the board. So what we're talking about, I think, is sort of a Pillow Fort deck idea, but you're not... You get to keep all that information to yourself.
Right. It's a lot of untapped mana on other people's turns. You only play...
I was gonna say, you know, Terrible Fog is probably a better example, but I see what Gavin's saying with that line. Okay, I gotta let the designers go about their words. I'm happy I didn't interrupt.
When it's necessary to play to help protect yourself. At a certain point, people will probably just stop attacking you because it'll almost always be not worthwhile.
It'll be moot.
Right. But I mean, there's quite a few cards that usually end up turning the tables. Right. So in 1v1 fog decks, there's maybe a lot of bounce, maybe a lot of removal or something like that to try and keep yourself alive. Sometimes it's life gain. But I think you're kind of talking about in a very combat focused Commander. It's not so much about removing the board. It's about using people's creatures to your own benefit.
Right. And I think this is...
So in terms of the 1v1 sense, you can think of something like Pauper Turbo Fog that's gone through some iterations now. The Simic version of Turbo Fog is a ramp fog style deck with the mill win condition. Sometimes there is damage based depending on if the mill is just going to take too long. They have... I don't know, they're too fast or whatever. But it's really casting a bunch of spells, playing out a bunch of mana, and casting like a stream of thought with replicate like multiple times, and just winning through there. You play a bunch of fogs, you play a bunch of cards that like allow you to play multiple lands, like or whatever. You build it up. Nowadays, it's like, is Golgari, where you're kind of recurring Crypt Rats. Like you're building out a board, you're drawing a bunch of cards, you're playing interaction through black, and then you're playing cards like Crypt Rat to damage your opponent out. Crypt Rat, it's nice because not only does it fog, but it also clears the board, right? So it deals damage to you, deals damage to your opponent, deals damage to the board as well. Now that big downside is that it deals damage to you. So hopefully you have some life gain, and you usually do pack enough to create that differential for yourself. But that is that 1v1 turbo fog. You either kind of ramp and mill for like a giant thing in Pauper, or you go for something kind of damage based after you control out the game. If you run out of Crypt Rats, then the Golgari version actually, I believe, does play like a 1 to 2 copies of Stream of Thought to like mill your opponent, but then shuffle certain cards like back in or whatever. But yeah, so that's the 1v1 that you want to think about if y'all wanted an analog. Go to the Pauper format.
Something that's overlooked in Commander often, which is using your opponent's creatures to have them attack your opponents, because if they're spending resources to defeat your the other opponents, they are in fact helping you,
right?
Yes.
And so playing their creatures to the board and attacking your opponents is actually beneficial to you. So if you're playing things like Farewell or Wrath of God or Day of Judgment, these things that destroy all the creatures, you're actually hurting yourself because you are destroying some of your resources, which are your opponent's creatures.
And especially,
shout out to finding the intro clip, by the way. But I imagine they'll go into it. It's very important as a Boardwipe player. I think a lot of casual players miss this too, is to create a situation where the Boardwipe is beneficial to you, right? So, you're losing your own creatures, but are you playing a control deck where your creatures don't really matter? Like your creatures only enter the battlefield and they just like return an instant or sorcery. They're like a 4-mana 1/1 or something. Like it doesn't really matter what they are, but they've had their effect and it doesn't matter. Whereas your opponents, they may not have had their effect. They're just playing like making giant 9/9 Kraken tokens. And so you need to kind of get rid of those. And even that player is probably playing like the card, I believe, is like Overwhelming Wave or something like that. Someone can correct me in the comments, but it's blue and 2 for a sorcery. And it's return all like non-Leviathan, non-Octopus or something like that. And it's like a one-sided board wipe with types that are primarily in blue. But I'm forgetting the name of the card, but creating board wipes like that, or even heck, Settle the Wreckage. Settle the Wreckage is a one-sided board wipe. It gives your opponents a lot of kind of value, but I mean, hey, it's very famous. It's done a lot of things in Constructed. People always meme on am I ready for Settle the Wreckage here? But that's a one-sided board wipe. It only hits attacking creatures. As the defending player, you're not going to have attacking creatures, so that's
actually because it's a lot more expensive. So you playing Farewell versus just playing a Fog is like, what's cheaper, right?
Right, and it's a sorcery, so you had to tap out on your turn. You're now wide open. There's all these things that happen because you have spent this a very large amount of mana to destroy everybody's creatures.
Right.
So the other thing that ends up happening is you played it on your turn, and now everybody else gets to play something before you.
Yes.
So if you're working with a one-turn Fog, which can effectively time walk somebody if their whole turn was, let me have a really big combat step and attack you, and you're like, right. Nope. Let's talk about how Turbo Fog decks won in Standard.
Sure.
Now, most of the time it was through milling your opponent out, where you would effectively nullify their creatures that are attacking you, either through life gain, either through, you would play things like Wrath of God in that deck. You would also play a bunch of fog effects, so every time they tried to attack you, they weren't doing any damage.
Right.
And then you would play something like Nephalia Drownyard or Millstone,
shout out.
These cards that slowly mill your opponent out, similar to Lantern Control in a way, where you're just letting the structures of the game defeat your opponent for you.
Which I think is interesting. I think it's interesting. It sounds, to me, maybe a little bit less annoying than Lantern Control, because Lantern Control is just like, well, if any card I want to play or that would be beneficial, that's just going to go away. Yeah. At least Fog, you get to play things, which can be a threat. That can be...
And this can be, I feel like Fog decks like really, really beat up on casual players that don't have that long-term mentality, because yes, at the end of the day, the Fog lets you keep your creatures, right? A lot of times, unless you're playing, there's that one Fog, I believe it's green and 1, and you prevent all combat damage and all tapped creatures can't untap. Great card. Absolutely fantastic card. Like that can be a bit more interaction, but you get to keep your cards. So as an affinity player in Pauper, when you're playing up against Turbo Fog, those artifacts that you keep around, like they're not getting board wiped. Like they will add to continue to decrease the cost of your Mirror Enforcers and continue to be there to sack to your Deadly Disputes. Like you still have access to your board. So in many ways it feels better, but for combat focused decks or for players that again are more casual, tend to be going for a lot more combat damage, don't have maybe a lot of intercard synergies, they're just frustrated because the one thing they're trying to do is getting stopped over and over. They keep playing creatures and not being able to do anything. Whereas a lot of times, like fogs are repeatable out of the graveyard, right? You have cards, you have fogs that have flashback. And so maybe if you played a little bit of main board graveyard hate, you'd be able to ping those out and force action out of your opponents. And so all these type of things kind of add up to this. Having your board, having creatures with activated abilities that still have value, creatures that, oh, if they attack this turn, you get to have value. So that way, even if you attack and you get fogged, you still get to get some value out of a creature attacking and then further enabling something later down the line. So all this stuff is important. Like fogs do feel better in that sense, but they tend to hurt, you know, the extremes a bit more than maybe a board wipe tends to be a bit more all-encompassing.
A somewhat dangerous thing potentially. Now, obviously, if the fog deck is really good, maybe it's just going to bounce it right back. Maybe it's going to wipe the board. Maybe it won't matter and damage will always be prevented, or they're going to be at such a high amount of health that you'll never make a dent, basically. But I like that the opportunity, because you can mill someone out and win the game that way, presents itself, the opportunity that like you could just win by essentially just surviving longer.
Yeah, like you're outliving your opponent. Yeah. Some things to keep in mind about like the play style and the strategy that's involved in playing a fog deck. You have to have a pretty deep knowledge of what cards are acceptable in what mode, I guess, right? Like if they're playing particular creatures, they might have some spells that might be able to do enough damage to you at an opportune moment to make you lose the game. So you sort of have to weigh like, okay, well, can I let this damage through and not fog now and wait, or do I need to make sure that I don't go down to a certain life total? Like you still have to have a pretty deep understanding of all the cards that are possible.
So a good way to highlight this again. I keep using Pauper. I'm sorry, folks. I've been on a Pauper binger because Modern is garbage right now, and so is Legacy. But another way to kind of bring this about is like mono blue, the mono blue or Dimir Terror deck, right? So you're playing these serpents, right? You're playing a control tempo deck that plays these 5/5s, and 5 is a good number, right? You're at 20 life, 4 attacks, right? So let's say you already get hit by a Cryptic Serpent, 5, or I think that's a 6/5, not a 5/6, but whatever. Like let's say you get a hit with an increment of 5, right? You're at 15. Then what happens is your opponent swings again for 5, right? That puts you to 10. Now you have to think in your mind based on the amount of mana that your opponent has, right? And the amount of mana that you have, you evaluate the fact that next turn you can only cast like 1 fog, right? It's probably only going to be 1 fog. You don't have a cheaper fog in hand. Maybe you might draw into it, but based on what you have in your hand, you only have 1 fog. So if you take this damage going from 15 to 10, and your opponent then plays another creature after combat, you immediately open yourself up to losing that game, to the point where if they counter your 1 fog the turn after, they have lethal on board. They have 2 creatures, they deal 5 damage, you're lost. So these are the type of things you have to consider. I'm at 15. Maybe I should fog this. That way, when my opponent attacks me next turn and then I fog the next turn, they might counter it. I'll take 10, but then I'm still at 5 life from 15. I can still kind of manage that because then I can maybe play out another land. And then the turn after that, maybe I can play 2 fogs. If they have the counter for 1, they might not have the counter for the second. If they do, they got it. But these are the type of situations that you have to consider as to the amount of damage you're taking, when to take damage, what to take damage from. If you maybe have only fogs from like single target stuff, let's say you have like an enchantment that gives you protection from a color, the very common in Pauper, maybe not so much these days, but you can gain protection from certain creatures. So you're obviously, if you can only gain protection from 3 creatures and they have 4, you're obviously going to gain protection from the creatures that do the most damage and maybe let the 1/1 through, right? These are the things that you have to consider.
I think in a commander setting, that's probably also true. There's still cards that make it so that damage can't be prevented or things like that, where those probably are pretty rare in terms of being in people's decks. But if you were to play this deck and it sort of becomes infamous amongst your group, people could easily put in cards like that to sort of ruin your day. The other thing that doesn't really work in Commander that works in 60 card is milling people out. You could do it.
You could do it. It's just a lot harder. It's similar to
Much more difficult.
Similar to an aggro deck problem. And with milling, it's that even more so.
Yeah, I mean, you're milling almost 300 cards to win the game. You're probably looking towards some of the alternative win conditions that Fog decks played, which is stuff like the Guild Gates. There's a, I forget what the card's called, but like you get all the Guild Gates in play in the game.
Yeah.
A lot easier now with
like,
more gates.
It's banned right now. Coalition Victory might be a good option if it becomes unbanned.
For some reason, it's banned.
Approach it the second.
Who thinks Coalition Victory should still be on the ban list? You're wrong. You're wrong. I will die on this hill. Coalition Victory is one of the most mid awful win conditions out there. Let it be unbanned. We let World Fire get unbanned. Nothing happened. If you think Coalition Victory should still be unbanned, don't give me that garbage don't give me that garbage argument of, oh, does it lead to positive play patterns? There are so many cards that have negative play patterns in the Commander format. You want everything banned? You want the Commander ban list to be 4 pages long? Oh, which is supposed to design cards better? Fam, look at the amount of sets they're releasing every year. Even if they cut that by half, by 75%, eventually they have to design more cards. They have to create exciting cards. You as this like ethereal person that understands card design and all this stuff. Look, at the end of the day, when you play your next hero shooter, you play Call of Duty, you play all this stuff, the broken gun, the broken hero, the broken champion, whatever, that sells. Okay? The broken card sells. It gets people in. It gets people excited. They can pick it up in Magic. They can, or in TCGs, they can open it up and they can sell it, right? In first person shooters and games like that, they get in, they want to play the broken hero. They want to have that hero fantasy of like, oh my God, I'm winning the game. Eventually it gets tiring, but you got to let these win conditions thrive. Eventually the busted thing will be printed. You cannot ban every single busted thing. You have to let formats evolve and adapt, which is why I'm so surprised the amount of people in my comment section, in my legacy videos, talking about, oh, legacy players complaining that they can't play their free spells. Boo-hoo, free spells suck. It's a format defined by free spells. It's the status quo. I don't know, like, I did a bad job of highlighting it, but it just goes to show you the amount of people that don't understand how legacy works. Like, the free spells suck in Pioneer and Standard and everything. But when everyone has access to free spells, then the playing field is even. That's what I've always been saying about, like, the companion mechanic as well. Either no one has it or everyone has it. Make a companion for everybody. Everyone has it or no one has it. That's what Commander is. Everyone's got a Commander, right?
And Sun, it's another good option, which is, you play it once and play it again.
It's a micro deck.
But I will say that these wins are not... A lot of people don't like this. Yeah. A lot of people don't like these play patterns.
What's the one creature when it enters battlefield, if you have life to 40 or more, you win the game?
Felidar Guardian? Yeah, that's a good one. These are some things to think about. The other ways that you could potentially win the game, this gets us to some of the really interesting fog effects that might be things to look towards. There's things like... Ink Shield is probably the most famous in Commander, is that you prevent all damage, and then for each 1 damage you prevented that way, you get a 2/1 creature with flying.
Right. Like,
so they attack you for 20, and you prevent it all, and then turn around and attack them for 40 on your turn.
Does Fog let you use it for other people's combat phases?
Sure could.
Okay, so you can protect other people's creatures too.
Yeah, you can mess up everybody's day.
Right.
Bingo.
So we talked about the whole guns versus butter thing. It's more of like a economic theory terms, but essentially it's either you are investing your resources to make guns or make butter, which is card draw, card advantage, mana advantage, board advantage, like any sort of additional advantage that will help you win the game later on.
Right, so normally in game terminology, guns would be a potentially effective strategy because you could use those guns to then take resources from other people. Right. But in Magic, like, you can't do that. It would be something like, I'm going to destroy your creature, but instead of destroying it, I get control of it.
Right. If you're playing a game of Civ 6 or something like that, and you go and take someone's city, you then get their city and their territories, but that's not in Magic. Therefore, it only benefits the player to not engage unless they have to engage. So I was looking at...
Although... It's not common, but stealing is a mechanic. It is, obviously, it's maybe sometimes multicolor or it's high costed. There's a lot of, it's a tough restriction on the cost. It might be like blue one, like thinking of cards like Blatant Thievery that tend to cost like a lot higher. Like, it exists, but exactly, it's not like destroying and you gain control of it. You have to have maybe an effect that already puts that out there. So you have to have a presupposed card, then you have to have another removal spell. Like, a lot of hoops you got to jump through. It exists.
I was just perusing Moxfield, just cursorily, not like super deep, but I found like a couple of Commander.
Yo, Forrest out here trying to act like he's not a sweat. yeah. It's all Moxfield, but a little casual. Yo, Forrest, if you're watching this, don't act like you're not a sweat.
Decks that were uploaded, and there's a legendary creature that people use as a commander that just has like a fog ability attached to them for like 3 mana. His name is Angus Mackenzie.
Oh yeah,
yeah, you know Angus.
Yeah.
You go way back. So Angus Mackenzie, he's a legendary creature, human cleric, green, white, blue, 2/2 stats, and you pay a green, white, blue, and tap him to prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn.
I believe like I'm pretty sure like the professor at Tolarian Community College like famously has an Angus Mackenzie deck, right? Am I wrong on that? Someone in the comments let me know.
And I think what's funny is like looking at this type of a deck, I think that a lot of people would assume like, well, that's the commander that you use. You're making a fog deck, therefore you should have this fog commander. Like that's what you should do.
Right.
Wrong.
Oh.
Don't do that.
Right.
What you do, get the colors you need, figure out that, and then find the commanders that's going to give you either mana or card draw or whatever it is that you need.
Or win you the game. That's
or
it.
win you the game, whichever.
Those are the 3 things that a commander can be. If it's anything else, you're probably wasting your time.
Right. Now, that being said, obviously, if you want to have a silly fog-themed deck, absolutely. Have Angus Mackenzie.
Sure.
He seems like a wonderful person. Put him in your deck. If you want to try and make sure that like the fog strategy might be somewhat viable, a lot of the times you're going to probably need to find how can you end up getting that advantage somehow. So yeah, Ristic study, probably having a lot of card draw in some way, or mana advantage or whatever that might be.
So I have a deck that's I have a Quain deck that's called Miracle Whip, which is sort of a group hug deck that plays miracle spells. This would be a very good shell for a fog deck in that I don't really care that my opponents are getting extra cards because I can play a single card that nullifies. As long as they're playing mostly creatures, they're playing combat-focused commander, I don't care how many creatures they have in play. I'm just going to fog if they attack me. So not only am I giving like currying favor because I'm helping and giving other people cards, but then you're probably not going to attack me anyway because I'm probably just going to fog. And then eventually you win the game through taking infinite turns or, whatever. You
fool. Quain is blue-white.
It's true.
How are you going to fog?
Well, you're right. I have to Holy Day. It's a little different. But
there you go. See, that was just a subtle way to show y'all there's always another way. Yeah, like if you played Rakdos, like your fog options are a little limited, but there's ways.
I will say that Quain does miss out on some of the best fogs because some of the best ones are in green. Well, fog itself is in green, but also things like Batwing Broom. This card's fucking sick.
Oh, yeah. That's the black-white.
Prevent all combat damage that we dealt this turn if white was spent to cast Broom. Okay. Each player lose 1 life for each attacking creature if black. Each player. Oh, that's sick. This is like a cool way to like if 10 creatures attack. So it says each player, right? So you too. This is like imagine if 10 people imagine if 10 creatures attack, right? If you spend because remember folks, you can spend black on the generic mana and white on the hybrid, right? That works ruling wise. If you spend Orzhov to cast this and 10 creatures attack, you could deal like 40 damage, prevent that damage, but then also deal 40 damage to everyone. So it's not even like so you prevent the combat damage, which is important, right? Like, so even if the attack goes through, you still take some damage. So it's like, okay, if you have blockers, technically you might be dealing yourself more damage, but then you prevent the damage being dealt to the blockers. You still take damage, but it could be a way to just deal damage universally. That's pretty sick. Like because this is how you got to equate it, right? Like these spells can do crazy amounts of damage. Like if you cast Fractured Sanity, right? They're talking about mill being hard. Fractured Sanity is 14 cards milled for each player, each opponent, I should say. And that mills for 3 blue. That mills, was it 42 cards? 14, 28. Yeah, 42 cards for 3 mana. That's pretty damn good. You got some reanimation strategies in there. You get your pick, right? That's all I'm saying. You get your pick. So cards like this are really important when it says each player. You get to equate like how much damage spells like this can really do. And again, that type of damage really does matter. Like, yeah, someone's at 60, it takes them to 50. Someone's at 20, it takes them to 10 though. right? So creates new breakpoints when cards like this do damage. That's a cool card.
Well,
I didn't
it's
know about
white,
this
and
card.
if you pay black as part of the cost, then you get to deal damage equal to the creatures that were attacking.
Right.
And then
Sick
Ink
art,
Shield
too.
is also white black. Before you ruin your entire commander night, maybe we should have a little disclaimer here that this is a very evil way to play the game, and most people aren't gonna like this. So
yeah, what I like about it. Okay, so here's the thing that I like about it. If you were not that lantern control is something that's even viable in Commander, because that's even harder to try and pull off, I think.
yeah, it's not possible.
But right, so what I like about it is that
If someone has made Lantern control possible in Commander, please comment your deck list down below. I'm really interested. In the future, I do want to do a video. I remember I tweeted this out a while ago, and someone was actually developing I want to look at like constructed decks that can turn into Commander decks. Like I want to see a Goblin Charbelcher deck, you know, in Commander. I want to see a Lantern control deck in Commander, right? Like I want to see these like really, obviously, I want to see an Ad Nauseum deck in Commander. Get out of here. I know what y'all are doing, okay? But these unique constructed limited, constructed confined combos that could really work. Cascade is a fun one, but like I think there's a lot of ways to do that. I feel like
defensive strategy that leans into the systems that Commander incentivizes you to lean into, but it doesn't suddenly, like, it's not. At some point when you're playing Lantern Control, there's this moment that opponents seem to have where they're like, I just can't win. Like, I realize that based off of the cards you have and the possibilities I have, I'm a skilled enough player to recognize when I am locked out. And I feel like Fog still has the opportunity in a way that you can interact, sort of.
Yeah.
As I was mentioning, you still get abilities of creatures. Like if you have a Fog player at your table, like play more creatures that if they attack, they get an ability. Play cards with activated abilities, ETBs, right? Like all these cards that still gain passive value. You don't need to attack, but if you get the opening, you're still getting like, a lot of damage through. Magic has, so many cards, 30 years worth of cards. Y'all can figure out some ways to be Fogs.
And this is one of the big issues with this archetype is that you can basically have the game locked up and no one knows.
No one knows because it's all in your hand.
It's all hidden information.
Right.
Well, if it's
where, with something like Lantern Control, that stuff, those are permanents in play. They can see like, okay, well, you're going to be able to mill 4 or 5 cards to see if any of those matter. And I'll have to have 5 cards in a row that can get me out of this prison. So yes.
I feel like so you got to think about it like this, right? Like you know, quote unquote, that you have this like locked up or whatever, right? So you have a bunch of Fogs in your hand, you can stop everything, but you don't necessarily know what's in your opponent's hands, right? In a constructed environment, you can make an educated guess, right? In a Lantern control deck, you can make an educated guess based on the amount of cards in your opponent's hand, what you've been allowing them to draw, what they have and have not been able to respond to, because at some point you're going to be able to see everything that they draw, and they haven't been responding to a bunch of cards that you've been playing. So you can estimate based on like the amount of mystery cards in their hand, it's not this, it's not this, it's not this, right? You can make educated guesses in a limited or a confined environment of a constructed game, which I find it's a lot more clear there. I'm not sure if it's necessarily true that it's a lot more clear in a game that if you see your own cards in a 4-player game, that it's more clear that you have a lockdown. I'm not sure if it's that much more clear versus a constructed environment where a player, your opponent playing against a Lantern control player, realizes that, like, they've seen me draw every single card. I played certain cards and they haven't answered them. That means they have the counterspell for the remaining stuff. They don't care about this card coming down. So I'm just going to call it here. They have the lock. Like, I feel like that's more clear.
Not really.
I don't know. Maybe that's
it's only one opponent.
You're right. We should bring land destruction back.
So the card that we referenced earlier that does see play in CEDH is the card Angel's Grace. This is one that's basically says that
before we get on Angel's Grace, this is based off a conversation I was having with a friend of mine. And if you cast Armageddon and you're not winning the game after that Armageddon, it's hands. I'm throwing hands. Why did you cast that Armageddon? If you cast Armageddon with no significant amount of mana rocks, if you cast Armageddon with like 1 Soul Ring out, I'm still throwing hands. Why are you doing that? Don't cast the wipe. Just let the game end. Don't be that person.
You can't lose the game. Your opponents can't win the game. Silence falls into this a little bit too, but silence is more like
it's just
make it so they can't play spells.
Yeah, can't play spells for the rest of the turn or something.
Yeah, that's more like I'm gonna win, so I'm gonna play silence and then go off and nobody can counter me. All right, so that's about it for fogs. If we're evil people that you would never play with at your commander table, let us know. That's our goal, right? We're just like, let's make.
I hope I get to play at your tables.
Possible.
Nah.
Out in Forest.
Nah.
Look, a great video, and as always, I know, like, you know, there's that whole thing with like React content, how it can take views away from the original video. You know, I love these two. Now I'm trying to do a lot better in terms of asking and kind of reacting less. Give these folks a subscribe, leave a like on their video, give it a good watch for the algorithm too. So don't even just leave a like, watch the video in the background, let it play in the background so YouTube picks it up in the algorithm. Do your due diligence, okay? Y'all are great. I think the problem with board wipes to me are that people play them in a situation that doesn't let them win, or they've cast the 8th board wipe up, and that's a problem. So like the first board wipe, the second board wipe, or whatever, like I find that's not a problem. Like, yeah, let's reset. We're only like 15, 20 minutes into this game. Yeah, it's gotten a little too crazy. If you're casting like the 8th board wipe, nah, let the game end. Let the game end. Don't be that person. Let the game end. Or if you're casting that board wipe and then you win, then it's fine. If you cast the 10th board wipe and you win the game after that, I'm fine with that, because you set up and constructed a situation where you're able to take advantage of the board being clear and opponent being low on resources. Again, the Armageddon example. If you're Armageddon with no mana rocks up, with no reasonable way to come back from this game and losing lands, why did you cast that? Right? Why did you cast that Armageddon? I don't know. I just, commander players sometimes confuse the heck out of me, but thankfully I've been blessed to have come across some relatively great people for the most part, the majority of my commander life here. So let me know what you think of the video down below. Let me know what you think about board wipes. Let me know what you think about fogs in general. I think fogs are a cool alternative. There's a lot of nuance in terms of, you know, constructed versus commander, obviously, and making them work. It's a lot harder in commander, but sometimes easier because they're naming some situations like Inkspell where you can protect an opponent. So there are some like political aspects to it. I think fogs are really, really well used. Obviously, they don't stop everything. I'm not sure if it's like, if you go all in on fogs, it's salty. If you play fogs though, and people are mad, I think people need to grow up a little bit, but that's where I stand on that stuff. But yeah, leave a like on this video, subscribe for some more commander yapping, and I don't know how the end of the video, I'm just talking. So we're done here.